Welcome back, America. Senator Tom Cotton is in deep, deep, deep trouble. He drove past Warren, Ohio this week and did not stop at the hot dog shop. Senator Cotton, what do you have to say for yourself?
Hugh, it's good to be back. Good to be back in session in Washington after my 12-day, 3,400-mile road trip with family. What I have to say for myself is I think what any father who's been on such a long road trip with his family said is that we had to make time, Hugh. We had to make time.
I get that. Okay, duly accepted. Senator, you're on Judiciary Committee, right?
I am on the Judiciary Committee, yes.
Have you read the AP story about Justice Sotomayor yet?
I saw the news, that apparently, according to the story, Justice Sotomayor's staff encourages, let's say, institutions that host her for speeches or other events to buy copies of her books. Surprisingly, it's not getting above the old front page coverage from the New York Times. I bet it's not the lead story on CNN or MSNBC, unlike the left-wing media's hit jobs on Justice Alito and Justice Thomas, just another example of the double standard the left uses in their campaign to try to delegitimize the court because it has a center-right majority on it.
Now, there was a deep, deep interest in Justice Alito's fishing trip from a decade ago because Paul Singer had some connection with a case that didn't get heard. Now I look here that Justice Sotomayor's staff pushed University of California, Davis to buy her books, the University of Wisconsin to buy her books, Clemson University to buy her books. She has made $3.7 million since she joined the court from book sales. Now, you're an author. Have you made $3.7 million from Only the Strong?
I haven't gotten my latest royalty statement yet, Hugh, but I don't think I've quite cracked that measure yet. I certainly would like to, as I know you would as a fellow author.
Yeah, but I don't ever demand anyone buy a set. You didn't either. When you came to the Nixon Library, we sold. You don't demand people do that.
And I guess you could. You're a private citizen, but no, as a United States Senator or Supreme Court Justice, I think it's somewhat inappropriate to demand institutions buy your book before you appear at it. The events I've done, like we did with you at the library, simply offer the book for sale and signature afterwards, Hugh.
So here's my question. If we apply the same standard of recusal that is being punted around by know-nothings in their critiques of Justices Alito and Thomas, should Justice of Sotomayor have ruled on an affirmative action case that affects almost certainly Clemson, which is private, and the state universities of Wisconsin and University of California at Davis? Ought she to have recused herself if she has in fact made money selling books at those institutions?
Well, Hugh, I think it's a question that's worth exploring next week if we proceed on the Judiciary Committee as Dick Durbin proposes on their sham bill to impose an ethics code on the Supreme Court that, as you've said in the past, could very well be unconstitutional, and that is really simply part of their campaign to try to delegitimize this court. Because, of course, if it's good for the goose, then it's good for the gander as well.
Well, I want to be clear. I don't think she's committed any ethical violation, and I don't believe she had to recuse in those cases. But if the left standards apply, she does. Second comparison. General Flynn was entrapped by Peter Strzok and wrongly prosecuted, and Bill Barr dropped the prosecution. Judge Emmett Sullivan hired an outside retired district court judge to file a report blasting the DOJ as corrupt. D.C. Circuit slapped him down. Now we have Hunter Biden with a gun charge and 2 tax evasions, not counting the 2 years of tax evasion that slipped past the statute of limitation. Do you think that judge ought to inquire into the facts and circumstances surrounding this plea deal?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of inquiries that need to be made about Hunter Biden's sweetheart plea deal. I think there's also inquiries that need to be made related to the plea deal based on the cocaine that was found in the White House a few days ago. Now, we don't know who it is, but as I heard one person joke, the Secret Service saying they can't figure it out is like the Hamburglar living at the White House and all the hamburgers go missing. And the Secret Service just says, well, we'll just never figure it out. We have no idea. You have Hunter Biden, who is a self-admitted cocaine addict, living in the White House, and cocaine turns up. And apparently the Secret Service is not questioning him, or the president's spokesperson thinks it's somehow illegitimate to at least ask the question, to at least ask how this got there, if it had anything to do with the president's own self-cocaine addict son. Now, maybe it's clean and had nothing to do with him, but I think it's at least worth worth probing a question because remember, Hugh, part of the sweetheart deal is the felony charge he faced got a diversion agreement if he remained drug-free and didn't commit any other crimes for 2 years, to bring it back to your question. So I think there are a lot of things that need to be asked about the sweetheart deal into the case against Hunter Biden, to include all the issues raised by the IRS whistleblowers that the U.S. attorney, who was supposedly the special counsel in this case, was not allowed to pursue charges against Hunter in places like Washington, D.C. and Southern California.
So my third double standard story of the morning, I don't know if you're from Arkansas, so the football knowledge is limited. But they have a great football coach at Northwestern, or they did until yesterday, Coach Fitzpatrick. And he got fired. Coach Patrick Fitzgerald. He got fired because a player was wrongfully hazed, a disgusting hazing, about which he knew nothing, and the university-appointed investigator determined he knew nothing. The university president at first said, okay, 2-week suspension for not knowing enough, and then they fired him. Now, compare and contrast that with the University of Pennsylvania's conduct about the Biden Center and about all the Chinese Communist Party money running through there. Have you seen any investigation in the latter, and what do you think about the penalty in the former?
Well, on the matter of Northwestern University, I saw the news last night, Hugh, on ESPN after the home run derby. I don't know enough about the underlying conduct and allegations and circumstances to opine on it, but I can certainly say that on the latter, the Biden Center at the University of Pennsylvania and President Biden's deep ties to the University of Pennsylvania, having made its former presidents, for instance, his ambassador to Germany, and Chinese communist links to that organization, I think it deserves deep probing, and deep probing by the media, which yet again seems totally incurious when it comes to these kinds of potentially corrupt linkages for Joe Biden and the family compared to, let's just say, the zeal with which they pursue such allegations against Republicans.
All right, last comparison. President Trump was dogged by questions of temperament, and when he appeared to be a little bit infirm walking down an airplane ramp, or maybe it was a commencement ramp, that story ran for days. President Biden was lost again yesterday. And I mean clueless about Buckingham Palace. And Marco Rubio, your colleague, tweeted out this morning, he feels bad for the president. Do we have the same standard at work here in considering the fitness for office of President Trump and President Biden?
Hugh, let me just say, given your theme this morning is media double standards, if that's all you're going to talk about, I'm not sure 3 hours is long enough to discuss them all. In fact, I'm not sure you have enough years left on our earth to discuss them all.
I may not.
You can't dedicate a show entirely to that, but no, of course not. Yeah, Donald Trump uses the hand railing to walk down a slippery ramp at West Point, and it's a 5-alarm fire for the media. Joe Biden often looks completely confused and out of sorts in public formal settings, like you said yesterday on his visit to the United Kingdom, or says things that are simply incomprehensible. And the media really does circle around him like a phalanx of bodyguards to prevent any questions from being asked or raising any concerns about this. But I think they're deeply worried about what would happen if Joe Biden were not the Democratic nominee, or if there were a contested fight for the Democratic nomination, and that it might bring a Republican back to the White House.
I just started reading Matt Lewis's new book about filthy rich politicians, and it's fascinating because he begins by saying there is an elite in the United States, and it has a different standard than everyone else. You and I are not part of that elite, by the way, even though we live in D.C. You and I are not part of that elite. The elite has to be left-wing and credentialed. Do you think this is making a mark on American politics? Because I think there's an earthquake coming.
Yeah, I think some of this mark goes back at least 8 years to the rise of Donald Trump, first the Republican nomination and then the White House. In many ways, I think he was not the cause of all that, as MSNBC would have it, but the result of it. Deep dissatisfaction among normal Americans across the country with the failures of self-appointed elites, be they in government or in business or in the media or what have you.
So, Senator, how do we correct that? If there's the rule of law is supposed to mean the same law applies to everyone, regardless of station, age, income, race, ethnicity, religious background. And it's clearly not the case. There's clearly a protected class that is not articulated anywhere, which is powerful people with the right opinions.
Well, all joking aside, I think simply pointing out these double standards, as you've done with me and as you frequently do and other center-right commentators do, is very helpful. It exposes it in a way that it wouldn't get exposed 30 or 40 years ago before the rise of talk radio and the internet and more conservative or just center-right voices with large platforms. Second, on the government front, I think, one, I'd like to have the Republican Senate again so that Congress can be more active than we are now and a Republican back in the White House to undertake the far-reaching reforms that are needed, in particular in institutions like the Department of Justice and the FBI, which at their highest ranks have unfortunately become deeply politicized under Joe Biden.
Now, last question. I think Leader McConnell and Steve Daines, who's running the NRSC, are doing a fine job. Do you like it when the NRSC intervenes in primaries, Senator Cotton?
Well, I know that Senator Daines has endorsed in some primaries, to include in his home state of Montana, where he's joined me in endorsing Tim Sheehy, a combat-wounded former Navy SEAL and very successful businessman, to take on John Tester. I'm not sure that means that the NRSC as an institution has also endorsed, but I would say that Senator Daines has done a great job so far finding good candidates, recruiting them, encouraging them to run. In some places, he's endorsed a single candidate like Tim Sheehy or Jim Banks in Indiana. In some places, we're going to have competitive primary, but we have great candidates across the board running like we have in Ohio. And I'm confident that we're going to have the right candidates. We're going to have a successful victory next year, in no small part to the hard work of Senator Daines and Senator McConnell.
I did not know you had endorsed Tim Sheehy. I'm glad to hear that. But when you campaign in Montana, it's longer than your drive back from wherever you were to D.C., isn't it?
Well, let's see. We went home for the 4th of July recess by land, and then we visited Nebraska, where I did some campaign events with Senator Fisher, who's up for re-election, and visited Strategic Command, and then on to Minnesota to see the in-laws, and then back to D.C. If you stretch it out in one straight line, we can get to Montana.
And you had the boys with you?
The whole shooting match, even the dog, you.
You know, Senator, I never had the courage to take the family on a road trip, so I salute you. Maybe that's because you're 101st Airborne vet, but I actually never had the courage to do that many miles. But you passed the hot dog shop, and that's a mark that's on your permanent record. Senator Tom Cotton, thank you. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned to the Hugh Hewitt Show.